November 25th of 2024, Netflix released this documentary entitled Cold Case: Who Killed JonBenéт Ramsey? If you have not watched the documentary or read the New People issue, I highly suggest you do so, because this case is a case that has been polarizing for over 28 years. And this case is very personal to me because I grew up and am very close in age to JonBenéт Ramsey. December 26th of 1996, the day after Christmas, Patsy Ramsey woke up, came downstairs to find a 3-page ransom note. She immediately, at 5:52 a.m., called the police of where they lived, which was Boulder, Colorado. This is the Ramsey family. That is John Ramsey and his wife Patsy Ramsey, and their son Burke, and their daughter JonBené. John Ramsey had previously been married before and had children, as well as these 2 children that he has with his second wife. The Ramsey family had just suffered an immeasurable loss when John Ramsey's daughter from his first marriage passed away suddenly in a tragic car accident at only the age of 22. When John Ramsey married his second wife, Patsy Ramsey, they went on to have their own 2 children, which included Burke and JonBené. So Patsy Ramsey wakes up and calls police at 5:52 a.m. despite what this 3-page ransom letter she finds at the bottom of the stairs tells her to do. They immediately call friends over for support as well as the police because at this point they're thinking it's a kidnapping. A female officer then tries to give the parents something to do and says, "Why don't you go search the house?" Which is exactly what John and Patsy Ramsey do. And John starts with the basement. Now, they had a very large house that was almost 6,300 square feet. And it was an older house that had an addition added to it. He goes downstairs and goes into this room, which was an old coal room that they converted into Burke's train room, which is where he had a train table and train setup and toys in there. They also kept miscellaneous storage items and holiday items down in the basement, as well as a wine cellar. John Ramsey goes into that old coal/train room, and he immediately finds his 6-year-old daughter's body. And it's covered up, tied up, has duct tape over her mouth. John Ramsey immediately takes the duct tape off of JonBenét's mouth and rushes up the stairs, screaming with his daughter's body. And this is where everything just goes chaotic and absolutely crazy. They notice that not only are her hands extremely bound, but she has a garrote tied around her neck so tight that it had strangled her, as well as what appears to be 2 burn marks from being tasered. They didn't know this until the autopsy, but she had also suffered severe fracture of her skull, which I believe they call that a craniocerebral fracture. From the very beginning, the Boulder Police completely botched the entire investigation, as well as allowed dozens of people to contaminate all areas of the house and crime scene. But from the very beginning, the police were dead set on blaming or convicting and charging either John or Patsy, if not both, for the unaliving of their little girl. One of the most absurd theories that investigators put out there was that Patsy, in an uncontrollable fit, did this to her daughter because of bedwetting. And as you can see from crime scene photos, JonBenét's bed did not have any urine anywhere on the sheets or the mattress or the bedding. However, the underwear and the pajamas that JonBenet was wearing had what looks like urine mixed with blood. These are the only 2 items where they have gotten DNA off of from the vaginal area of those underwear and the waistband of her pajama pants. As you can see, she's wearing in crime scene photos. The Ramsey family celebrated Christmas Eve and Christmas with not only family, but also friends, which is exactly what they did on those days leading up to and on Christmas Day itself. They thought their children were very tired from having a long get-together. They come home late at night, they go to bed, and then their lives completely change on December 26th of 1996. And this is a case that has always gotten to me because not only am I very close in age to JonBené and remember the last 28 years of what the news media and publishings and people have done and said about the Ramsey family, but I have watched every documentary or episode ever made or published about this case. And I am of the opinion, very differing from many people, that it truly was a deviant who broke into their home and did this to her. And it took years and years and years of hell of a nightmare for John and Patsy Ramsey, including Patsy, who had gone through stage 4 ovarian cancer. I myself had stage 3 cervical cancer, so I can only sympathize. But years later, her cancer came back and she ultimately passed away. On June 24th of 2006, Patsy Ramsey, at the age of 49, dies after recurrence of her ovarian cancer. She did not live to see the day that the Boulder police were finally held accountable and did their job and their investigation and found the killer of her daughter, JonBené. They did not think that that DNA was going to ever help them solve the case, and they did not think that it was a critical piece of evidence. However, today, it's the only piece of evidence that could actually solve this crime. On July 9th of 2008, Boulder DA Mary Lacey formally cleared the Ramseys of any suspicion, citing DNA evidence. Lacey also delivers an apology directly to John Ramsey. However, his wife had passed 2 years earlier and was not alive to get that apology or the clearing of her and her husband's name. A very seasoned detective and investigator named Lou Smith has been adamant his entirety of handling this case that this was an outside perpetrator. This was a PDF file who had seen her and targeted her, and he did this and he left through that basement window. When investigators went down to check the basement, they found this middle window open with a suitcase underneath it, meaning that that perpetrator probably came in through that window and went out. Lou Smith himself, years later, did prove that that's possible. Those 3 windows that you just saw are underneath this gate. And the police originally thought that nobody could get in through there because there was cobwebs in these corners and there was no foliage or snow anywhere in that area, and they did not see any footprints. However, that became problematic because there was no snow in that whole area of the house anyway. And there was little foliage all underneath the grate, meaning somebody had lifted it up and put it down because it couldn't have grown under it. Lou Smith spent the rest of his life fighting tooth and nail to clear John and Patsy Ramsey from any suspicion. And still to this day, a large part of society think that one of them had something to do with it. This is a stand-up guy who is very seasoned and experienced in his job. And he was the only one that cared enough to actually do the right thing. When he was passing away, he made sure that both of his daughters would carry on finding out who it was that murdered JonBené Ramsey. And they have, so far, upheld their father's wishes. He then passed away and never got to see who the perpetrator of this crime was, or the privilege of knowing that he was correct all along. And even though he fought all of society and the world against the false media narrative and the misinformation about John and Patsy Ramsey single-handedly, he knew that that DNA would somehow be the one key factor that could get this solved. And he always held firm to that. it's not too late for the Boulder Police to do the right thing and turn the DNA over to C.C. Moore, a genetic genealogist who can solve this.